Tamriel, where the gods unmade Lorkhan and left their adamantine Tower of Secrets, where the mortal world of Mundus intersects with the infinity of Oblivion and the eternity of Aetherius. Many temporal rulers have tried to tame it over the millennia, but only those blessed by the divines have succeeded. Welcome to the Wizards and Warriors series on the history of the Elder Scrolls universe, and our first video in which we will explore the history of Tamriel from its most ancient ages to the rise of the exalted Tiber Septim, the emperor who became a god. And while becoming a god might be out of reach for us, you can claim new powers over the digital realm by using the sponsor of this video, NordVPN, at nordvpn.com/wizardswarriors, link in the description. NordVPN redirects your internet traffic through one of over 5,200 servers in 60 countries, not only encrypting your traffic to avoid data gathering, but giving you the potential to access TV shows and movies only available in certain countries. Same for region-exclusive video games, and you can even buy things in other countries where they're cheaper. It also stops ISPs throttling your download speeds. It's easy to do, enabled in one click, and you can tap on a map to change your connection's location instantly. Plus, tests have shown NordVPN to be the fastest provider out there. You get protection on 6 devices, be they Windows, Android, and thanks to our deal, you don't have to pay full price. Support Wizards and Warriors, get a month of free premium VPN, and save 70% on a 2-year plan by going to nordvpn.com/wizardswarriors, link in the description, or by using our coupon code WizardsWarriors at checkout. The earliest known inhabitants of the continent later called Tamriel were the Beastfolk, ancient ancestors of the reptilian Argonians and the feline Khajiit, among others like the ape-like Imgur and now extinct Foxfolk and Birdfolk. Next came the Aldmer, the Elder Folk, who millennia before made landfall on what is now Alinor or the Somerset Isles. This began the Metheric era, the Age of Elves. From Alinor, the Aldmer would begin their colonization of the mainland, pushing the Beastfolk into the uninhabitable deserts, jungles and swamps on the edges of the continent. In the center of Cyrodiil, they built the White Gold Tower, which forever would become a symbol of imperial power for whoever controlled it. As generations passed, the Elder Folk became increasingly divided. Those who populated modern-day Morrowind became the Chimmer, ancestors of the modern Dark Elves. Concurrently, the elves of the White Gold Tower had slowly evolved into the Eyelids, or Heartland Wild Elves. These two peoples worshipped the demonic Daedra of Oblivion, something their Aldmer ancestors had strictly forbidden. Some elves became the Dwemer, or Deep Folk, rejecting the superiority of all gods and secluding themselves in deep underground technocratic societies. Those who disappeared into the deep forests of Valenwood became the wild and carnivorous Bosmer, Wood Elves, and those who lived in High Rock or stayed in Alinor became the Altmer, High Elves, the closest descendants of the original Aldmer. No one seems to agree on how and when the races of men arrived on Tamriel. If Nordic legend is to be believed, then they were created on Skyrim's highest mountain, where the sky goddess Kyne formed them with her breath. In any case, by the Middle Merethic era, a diversity of early human tribes had dispersed across Tamriel. In most places, they were forced to become subordinate to the elves. In High Rock, the men were subjugated under the local Altmer clan, the Direni, who began taking on human concubines and producing half-blooded children, resulting in a magically gifted race, the ancestors of the modern Breton people. Meanwhile, the menfolk who found themselves in Cyrodiil were indiscriminately enslaved by the Eyelids, who subjected them to horrific tortures like flesh sculpting and gut gardening. This was often done at the behest of their cruel Daedric overlords, who rewarded those depravities by giving the Eyelids armies of Daedric creatures to command. However, as the Merethic Age passed into the First Era, the balance of power between men and Mer would shift. The turning tide was when the ancestors of the modern Nords began a multi-generational exodus from their ancestral homeland in northern Atmora back into Skyrim, the land of their mother Kyne. There, they encountered the Falmer, or Snow Elves. Relations were initially peaceful until the Falmer attacked the Nordic city of Sarthal, massacring its population. But they didn't finish the job, for a warrior named Iskramor was able to escape and return to Atmora. There he recruited a mighty army, known as the 500 Companions, and returned to wreak an act of genocidal revenge on the Snow Elves, claiming Skyrim for the Nords. While this was happening, a slave in Cyrodiil, praying on the sacred hill of Sancre-Tor, had received a vision from Akatosh, the king of the dragons. The chief of the divines had imbued her with the blood of dragons and gifted her the magically imbued Amulet of Kings. Akatosh promised that so long as men were ruled by a dragonborn who bore the amulet, the gates of oblivion would remain closed, depriving the Aelids of their demonic soldiers. This slave who received this vision was named Alessia, and now charged by divine blessing, she became a queen, leading a massive uprising that captured the White Gold Tower from the Aelids in year 243 of the First Era. Alessia died in 266, but she left behind the First Empire of Men, whose dragon-blooded emperors would sit atop the ruby throne in the White Gold Tower for the next 2,000 years. Now free from elvish rule, the modern mannish races of Tamriel began to form. In High Rock, centuries of warfare with Nords and Alessians had left the Direni High Elves near death, allowing for their human descendants, the magically inclined Bretons, to become the hegemons of that region, while in Skyrim, the Nordic culture flourished. While elven kingdoms persisted in Alinor, Valenwood and Morrowind, it was now clear that the Age of Myr was over and the Age of Men had begun. Despite this, Alessia's realm was never able to unite humanity. The proudly independent Nords never accepted imperial rule, while the Alessian control over the capricious Breton sorcerer kings was always tenuous at best. Meanwhile, on the horizons beyond Strossum Kai, a whole new mannish enemy would emerge. Having sundered their own homeland of Yakuda, the Ragada, or Red Guards as they came to be known, arrived in Tamriel in 808 of the First Era, swiftly and brutally conquering the Alik'r Desert and annihilating its native populations. By First Era 2331, Alessia's empire was dissolved, crushed under the weight of internal religious struggles. Consequently, Cyrodiil fractured into numerous petty kingdoms for the next 400 years. But soon, an empire, ruled rightfully by a dragonborn ruler, would rise again. According to myth, the seeds of the Second Empire were sown when the 2,000-year-old spirit of Alessia, bound to the hill of Sancre-Tor, participated in a divine conception with a mad king named Hrol. In his efforts to make love with a magic mountain, Hrol would expire, leaving an infant with Akatosh's divine Amulet of Kings embedded into his forehead, a dragon-blooded child named Remen, the Light of Man. Young Remen's first test came in 2703 of the First Era, when the Seiski, natives of the mythical eastern continent of Akavir, landed on the northern coast of Tamriel. Some claim the Seiski were exotic snake-like creatures, while others say they were a wayward race of men. Either way, these invaders tore through the armies of the Nords before garrisoning themselves at a mountain keep called Pale Pass. Remen utilized the Akaviri threat to unite all of the disparate lords of Cyrodiil under him. He then marched to Pale Pass to confront the invaders. Yet in a strange turn of events, as soon as the Seiski heard Remen's voice, they poured out of their keep and prostrated themselves before him, claiming that they had finally found what they had come to Tamriel to seek, the Dragonborn. And just like that, Remen was the most powerful man in Tamriel, not only with all of Cyrodiil at his back, but now also supported by the mighty Snake Men, who he incorporated into a special unit, the Dragon Guard. During his reign, and that of his successors, the Empire of Man was born anew. In the Heartlands, a mixture of Nordic, Breton and native Cyrodiilic cultures gave rise to the modern imperial race, which achieved what the Alessians could not when they incorporated Skyrim, High Rock and Hammerfell into their growing domain. Before long, even the domains of elves and beastfolk, fearing the Remenite armies, nominally swore fealty to the Second Empire of Men. The lone exception were the Dark Elves of Morrowind, who after a mild kerfuffle involving the heart of Lorkhan, now unexisted Dwemer, and being universally cursed by Daedric Prince Azura, were ruled by a tribunal of nigh undefeatable living gods who killed the third Remanite emperor, Reman II, in battle. This led the Second Empire to go into decline, and in First Era 2920, the Teyski Dragon Guard launched a coup against his successor, Reman III, deposing him and creating a regime known as the Ekaviri Potentate. The extinction of the House of Reman marked the end of the First Era, and 430 years later, the assassination of the last Teyski Potentate resulted in the end of the empire they had built. The line of Dragonborn emperors was once again broken, and the Amulet of Kings was once again missing, and Tamriel was once again divided. It is here that our story finally arrives upon the birth of the man of many names, Talos Stormcrown, Tiberius Imperator, the mortal who became a god. The victory account, known as the Arcturian Heresy, claims he was born on the island of Alker in High Rock, and his birth name was Hajalti Earlybeard. Whatever his origins, Hajalti Talos spent his youth in Skyrim, where the hardy Nords groomed him to be a warrior, teaching him to wield not just sword and axe, but also his own voice. For centuries, the Nords had utilized the Storm Voice, or Thu'um, a form of magic that they had been taught by the dragons. For even the most powerful of Nords, it took many years of training to master even a few words of the dragon tongue. But young Talos took to it naturally, and in a remarkably short time was able to shout as forcefully as the eldest and most powerful of dragons. As a teen, Talos found himself in the service of Cuchulainn, the petty king of Falkreath. Due to his powerful command of the Thu'um, Cuchulainn quickly made Talos his general, a decision which paid off when the Dragonborn were sent to conquer the Reachmen, a wild offshoot of the Bretons native to the titular Reach region of Skyrim. With only a small band of Nordic warriors and Western Cyrodiils, known as the Colovians, Hajalti carved through the tribes of the Reachmen and their briar-hearted kings with ease, until he had forced them back into the fortress of Old Hroldan. At first, the Reachmen were confident, heckling Hajalti from the safety of their high walls. But then a fierce storm broke out. Imbued with power, the Dragonborn general shouted down the walls of Old Hroldan with his mighty Thu'um and stormed the keep, officially annexing the Reach into Cuchulainn's domain. Hajalti was only 20 at this time. It is likely here where, awed by his mighty powers, his soldiers began to call him Talos, Stormcrown. After Old Hroldan fell, the sky darkened and thunder rolled across the sky. From the monastery of High Hrothgar atop the sacred throat of the world, the Greybeards spoke Talos' name, and the world shook. The Greybeards were the most sacred of Nordic institutions, a coven of wise monks who, other than the Dragonborn, were the most powerful Thu'um users in the world. One does not take their summons lightly, and so Talos made his pilgrimage up High Hrothgar. There, the Greybeards heralded him as Ysmir, Dragon of the North. They declared him to be Dragonborn, perhaps the first since Reman, and told him that, like all Dragonborn who came before him, he was prophesied to unite Tamriel. In the wake of his recent conquests, Talos had attracted new enemies, jealous of his growing power. In 2E852, an alliance of Nordic freeholds and Breton kingdoms crossed the border into Cyrodiil, where they occupied the major passes in the Gerol Mountains and settled into the ancient and sacred city of Sancre-Tor, where Alessia had received her divine vision from Akatosh millennia ago. From there, the Nords and Bretons made plans to conquer the entirety of Tamriel and dared the supposedly invincible General Stormborn to try and stop them. Thus began the event which would launch Stormborn into greatness, the Battle of Sancre-Tor. It was the dead of winter when Talos received this provocation, but he was never one to turn down a challenge and immediately marched south from Falkreath. We can assume that to avoid the Breton Nordic garrisons in the Gerol Mountain passes, Talos marched his armies right over the mountains themselves, like a general from a state called Carthage in another universe. As a result, when Talos' army of Colovian legionaries descended upon the Cyrodiilic plains at the foot of the Gerals, they were short on rations, exhausted, poorly outfitted, and overall unprepared for winter campaigning. At a glance, the Nord-Breton alliance had the overwhelming force. While Talos had been marching, they had turned Sancre-Tor into an impregnable redoubt. High walls built atop an unscalable cliff face dominated the front of the fortress. The only entrance to the fort lay in its rear, in a mountain basin at the base of equally unscalable heights and concealed by a massive illusion conjured by the Breton battle mages, who had created an ephemeral lake over the basin, concealing the fort gate that lay within it. Before long, Talos had arrived in the lowlands beneath the citadel, assembling his ragged, exhausted levies in plain view of the Bretons and Nords in the castle above. So weak, vulnerable, and small in number did they look, that the alliance decided there wasn't any need to wait out their foe from the safety of their fortress. Instead, they sallied out of Sancre-Tor in force, leaving only a small garrison within the walls, while the rest would charge and overwhelm Talos' host. A fatal underestimation of their foe, which would prove to be their undoing. Unbeknownst to the alliance, Talos had managed to secure the loyalty of a secret Breton defector, and through either intimidation or cajolement, had convinced him to reveal the secret of Sancre-Tor's concealed entrance. Furthermore, the supposedly feeble nature of Talos' army was also a ruse, for the Colovians in the lowlands in front of the fort represented only a small rearguard, while the rest, acting on the defector's information, had secretly snuck around the fortress, descended the supposedly unscalable cliffs, and penetrated the illusionary lake. The coup de grace soon followed. The bulk of the Bretons and Nords charged down into the lowlands, swamping the Colovian rearguard, who despite being massively outnumbered, held true and never broke their lines. Meanwhile, the Dragonborn had used his Thu'um to shout down the citadel gate, and with the cream of his troops, stormed inside and annihilated its small defense force, capturing the Nord-Breton nobles who remained in the fort. Seeing that Sancre-Tor had fallen, the alliance's morale quickly plummeted and then fell apart entirely. The confused and demoralized Nord captives, suspicious of the scheming Breton sorcerer's territorial ambitions, and awed by Stormcrown's dragonborn nature, which was sacred to them, deserted the Bretons and swore loyalty to Talos. The Skyrim generals joined their rank and file in Stormcrown's army, while the High Rock Battle Mage command was summarily executed and the captive Bretons imprisoned or sold into slavery. Following his great triumph, Talos took a somber tour through the ancient catacombs of Sancre-Tor, where the ancient dragonborn rulers of Man lay entombed. Passing among the presents of Saint Alessia, Remen, and those of their sacred bloodlines, he came upon the tomb of Remen III, the last emperor of Man. Upon his remains, Talos found the Amulet of Kings, the sacred artifact of mankind's covenant to the most holy Akatosh. In Tamriel, one should never attribute to coincidence what can be explained by fate, and with the ancient amulet in his hands, the Dragon of the North no doubt felt the prophecy of the Greybeards slowly coming to fruition. But for now, Talos was not yet an emperor, but a general serving under King Cuchulainn. And indeed, under Talos' invincible generalship and his mighty Thu'um, kingdom after kingdom fell into Cuchulainn's domain. Within only a few months of Sancre-Tor, Talos had brought the Colovian estates of Western Cyrodiil under Cuchulainn's rule, and the eastern merchant lords of Nibelheim soon followed. Finally, in Second Era 854, Talos marched into the Imperial City, home of the White Gold Tower, where the Remenite emperors had once lit the sacred dragon fires in the temples of Akatosh, which marked their imperial rule. With the Imperial Heartland now under his control, Cuchulainn now intended to have himself crowned emperor, with his invincible general Talos at his side. But Cuchulainn was no dragonborn, and could never wield the Amulet of Kings, thus his reign was never meant to be. What happened next is a matter of fierce debate. Some claim that a Reachman assassin managed to sneak into the Imperial Palace and assassinate the would-be emperor, while Talos, attempting to defend his liege, had his throat cut, but managed to survive. Others claim that it was Talos himself who murdered Cuchulainn, and after the act, slit his own throat to deflect suspicion. Whatever the case, it would be the Dragon of the North, bearing the Amulet of Kings and renewing the ancient pact with Akatosh, ascended as the first Dragonborn Emperor of the Third Empire of Man. The damage to his throat would leave Talos permanently crippled, and he would never shout again. But he would conquer. Cyrodiil was his, but Cyrodiil was just the beginning. Just as the Greybeards prophesied, Stormcrown was destined to unite all the provinces of Tamriel under him. Not as Talos, however, but as a man reborn. An emperor who took on a new name in honor of his adopted imperial homeland, Tiber Septim. Thus ends our first episode on the history of the Elder Scrolls universe. In our next episode, we will take you on a whirlwind of battles as Tiber conquers his way through Tamriel. We're planning to cover the battles of all major fantasy, sci-fi and alternative history worlds, so make sure you have subscribed and pressed the bell button. Please consider liking and sharing. This goes a long way to help us in the eyes of the almighty algorithm. We'll try to read and respond to every comment, as we want to see what you think about this video and which videos you hope to see in the future. Your feedback is very important to us. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we'll catch you on the next one.